Welcome to the Discourse Analyzer AI Toolkit, where articles come alive. You're listening to the audio version of our article. For the full text and an interactive experience, check out the link in the description below. Interact with any selection using our AI assistant to enhance your understanding. Let's explore.
Media coverage in discourse analysis. Interactive assistant media coverage refers to how events, issues, and topics are reported and represented in the news, including newspapers, television, radio, online platforms, and social media. In discourse analysis, media coverage is studied to understand how language shapes public perceptions, influences social and political attitudes, and reflects power dynamics in society. Media coverage not only provides information but also frames issues in ways that can reinforce or challenge dominant ideologies, cultural norms, and societal values. Discourse analysis of media coverage focuses on the linguistic choices made in news reports, headlines, editorials, and interviews, examining how these choices affect the construction of meaning. By analyzing the framing, metaphors, tone, and selection of sources in media coverage, discourse analysts uncover how media outlets represent reality, privilege certain voices, and marginalize others. This type of analysis helps to reveal the role of the media in shaping public opinion, influencing policy, and maintaining or challenging power structures. Key features of media coverage in discourse analysis. 1. Framing of events and issues. Framing is how media coverage presents and organizes information to highlight certain aspects of a story while downplaying or ignoring others. Discourse analysis investigates how media outlets frame events, who is presented as responsible, and which perspectives are given prominence. Example: in coverage of climate change, one outlet might frame it as an urgent global crisis, using language like, "the planet is on the brink of disaster," while another outlet frames it as a debatable issue, stating, "scientists are divided on the severity of climate change." Discourse analysis would explore how these different framings shape public understanding and political responses to environmental issues. 2. Use of metaphors and symbolism. The use of metaphors and symbolism in media coverage can deeply influence how events and issues are understood. Discourse analysis examines how metaphors shape the emotional and cognitive framing of a story, influencing how audiences perceive the seriousness, scale, or nature of an issue. Example: during economic crises, media might describe the situation using metaphors like, "the economy is a sinking ship," invoking feelings of urgency and danger. Discourse analysis would explore how these metaphors influence public sentiment and political responses by creating an image of impending disaster. 3. Bias and objectivity. Media coverage is often scrutinized for its bias or objectivity. Discourse analysis investigates how language reflects media bias, examining whether certain viewpoints are favored, how neutral or emotional language is used, and how sources are selected and framed. Example: in reporting on immigration, a news outlet might use terms like illegal immigrants versus undocumented migrants, reflecting different ideological positions. Discourse analysis would explore how these linguistic choices reflect and reinforce particular views on immigration, either criminalizing or humanizing the subjects. 4. Voice and representation. Voice and representation refer to which perspectives and actors are highlighted in media coverage. Discourse analysis looks at whose voices are heard, e.g., politicians, experts, marginalized groups, whose are excluded, and how different groups are represented, often revealing power dynamics and social hierarchies. Example: in coverage of protests, media might focus on official voices, e.g., government representatives or police, and neglect the voices of the protesters themselves. Discourse analysis would explore how this exclusion affects public perception of the protests, potentially portraying them as disruptive or illegitimate while upholding state authority. 5. Construction of public figures and narratives. Media plays a significant role in constructing public figures and creating narratives about political leaders, celebrities, and other key actors. Discourse analysis examines how media language constructs the identities of these figures, emphasizing certain traits, e.g., leadership, charisma, incompetence, while downplaying others. Example: coverage of a political leader might describe them as strong and decisive, or divisive and authoritarian, shaping the public's perception of their leadership style. Discourse analysis would explore how these descriptions contribute to the leader's public image and influence political support or opposition. 6. Agenda setting. The media plays a crucial role in agenda setting, determining which issues receive public attention and which are ignored. Discourse analysis investigates how media coverage prioritizes certain topics, influencing what the public views as important, and how the media shapes the boundaries of public debate. Example: in covering public health, one outlet might focus on COVID-19's economic impact, while another emphasizes the human toll and healthcare challenges. Discourse analysis would explore how these agenda-setting choices shape public discussions about the pandemic, directing attention toward specific aspects and away from others. 7. Media ownership and ideology. Media ownership often influences the ideological stance of coverage, shaping how stories are reported and what perspectives are emphasized. Discourse analysis examines how ownership structures and political affiliations impact media narratives and contribute to the perpetuation of certain ideologies. Example: a media outlet owned by a conservative corporation might emphasize free market solutions to economic issues, using phrases like the power of business to drive recovery, while downplaying government intervention. Discourse analysis would investigate how this language reflects the ideological stance of the outlet and shapes public attitudes toward economic policy. Methods for analyzing media coverage in discourse. 1. Critical discourse analysis, CDA. Critical discourse analysis, CDA, explores how language in media coverage reflects and reproduces power relations, ideologies, and societal structures. CDA focuses on how media discourse privileges certain voices and viewpoints while marginalizing others, and how language maintains or challenges social hierarchies. Example: a CDA of media coverage of police violence might reveal how language like officers responded to threats shifts focus onto the actions of the victims rather than the police. The analysis would explore how this discourse reflects broader power dynamics between law enforcement and marginalized communities, shaping public attitudes toward justice and accountability. 2. Frame analysis. Frame analysis investigates how media coverage frames events or issues by emphasizing particular aspects and downplaying others. This method helps to uncover the underlying ideologies and priorities shaping media narratives and public opinion. Example: in framing a labor strike, one media outlet might focus on disruptions to daily life, while another highlights workers fighting for fair wages. Frame analysis would explore how these different frames shape public understanding of the strike and influence sympathies toward workers or businesses. 3. Narrative analysis. Narrative analysis looks at how media coverage constructs stories about events, individuals, or social issues. This method examines the structure of the narrative, the roles assigned to different actors, e.g., heroes, victims, villains, and how these stories influence public perception. Example: in reporting on natural disasters, media might construct a narrative of heroic first responders saving lives, focusing on individual acts of heroism while downplaying systemic issues like poor disaster preparedness. Narrative analysis would investigate how this story shapes public understanding of the disaster response and government accountability. 4. Content analysis. Content analysis systematically examines the frequency and patterns of certain terms, topics, or themes in media coverage. This method is useful for quantifying how often specific issues, viewpoints, or actors appear in the media and how language is consistently used across multiple reports. Example: a content analysis of climate change coverage might reveal how often terms like climate crisis versus climate change are used, reflecting the degree of urgency conveyed by different media outlets. This analysis would provide insights into how language shapes the perception of environmental issues across the media landscape. Examples of media coverage in discourse analysis. Example 1. COVID-19 pandemic coverage. Different media outlets framed the COVID-19 pandemic in varying ways. For instance, some focused on the health crisis with language like overwhelmed hospitals and rising death tolls, while others highlighted the economic impact, saying, businesses struggling under lockdowns. Discourse analysis would explore how these framings influenced public responses, such as compliance with health measures or calls for reopening the economy. Example 2. Immigration coverage in news media. In immigration coverage, one news outlet might describe migrants as illegal immigrants flooding the border, emphasizing criminality and invasion, while another might use phrases like asylum seekers fleeing violence, framing them as victims deserving compassion. Discourse analysis would investigate how these contrasting representations influence public attitudes toward immigration policy. Example 3. Media representation of climate change. Media coverage of climate change might use terms like climate emergency versus climate debate, reflecting differing levels of urgency. Discourse analysis would examine how these linguistic choices influence public understanding of climate change as either a pressing, uncontested issue or a topic of ongoing debate. Example 4. Protest coverage in the media. Coverage of protests, such as those for racial justice, might focus on violent clashes between protesters and police, or describe peaceful demonstrators calling for change. Discourse analysis would explore how the focus on violence versus peaceful activism shapes public perceptions of the protest's legitimacy and its goals. Example 5. Media coverage of elections. In election coverage, a candidate might be described as a populist outsider challenging the establishment, or as an inexperienced radical threatening stability. Discourse analysis would investigate how these different descriptions frame the candidate's campaign and influence voter perceptions of their suitability for office. Challenges in analyzing media coverage through discourse. 1. Media bias and ideological diversity. Media outlets often have distinct ideological leanings, making it challenging to generalize about media coverage without considering these biases. Discourse analysts must account for how ideological diversity influences the framing of issues across different media platforms. 2. Rapid media cycles. The fast-paced nature of the modern media landscape can lead to shifting narratives and evolving language use. Discourse analysts must be attentive to how media coverage changes over time, particularly during ongoing events such as elections or crises. 3. Global versus local perspectives. Media coverage often differs significantly between global and local contexts. Discourse analysts must consider how the same issue is framed differently in international versus national or local media, reflecting different cultural, political, and economic priorities. Conclusion. Media coverage plays a crucial role in shaping public understanding, setting agendas, and framing societal debates. Through discourse analysis, researchers can explore how language in media reports constructs narratives, reflects power relations, and influences public opinion. By examining framing, metaphor use, representation, and bias, discourse analysis reveals the underlying ideologies that shape how events are reported and understood. Understanding the role of media discourse is essential for critically engaging with news and recognizing the power of language in shaping social and political realities. Frequently asked questions. What does discourse analysis reveal about media coverage? Discourse analysis uncovers how language in media shapes public perception, reinforces or challenges power structures, and reflects ideological positions. It examines the framing, representation, and linguistic choices in media reports to understand their influence on societal attitudes and opinions. How does framing affect media coverage? Framing highlights certain aspects of a story while downplaying others, shaping how audiences perceive events. For example, media framing of protests as peaceful demonstrations versus violent clashes influences public support or opposition to the movement. How do metaphors in media coverage shape public understanding? Metaphors create vivid imagery that can shape emotions and perceptions. A headline like, "The economy is a sinking ship," invokes a sense of danger and urgency, influencing how audiences prioritize and respond to economic issues. What role does bias play in media coverage? Media bias affects objectivity by emphasizing certain viewpoints over others. Discourse analysis examines how language choices, like using illegal immigrants versus asylum seekers, reflect ideological leanings and frame subjects in different lights. How is voice and representation analyzed in media coverage? Voice and representation focus on which perspectives are highlighted and which are marginalized. Discourse analysis explores whose voices are privileged, e.g., government officials, and whose are minimized, e.g., marginalized communities, revealing power dynamics in media narratives. How does media construct narratives about public figures? Media often frames public figures with specific traits, such as decisive leader or controversial figure, shaping their public image. Discourse analysis investigates how such language affects audience perceptions of their character and policy positions. What is the significance of agenda setting in media coverage? Agenda setting determines which issues receive attention. By analyzing what topics media prioritize, discourse analysts reveal how public debate is influenced and which narratives are amplified or neglected. How does media ownership impact discourse? Ownership influences the ideological slant of media outlets. Discourse analysis examines how corporate or political affiliations shape the language used in reporting, reflecting broader societal and economic interests. What methods are commonly used to analyze media coverage? Critical discourse analysis, CDA, examines power and ideology in media language. Frame analysis investigates how issues are presented. Narrative analysis analyzes story structures and roles within media reports. Content analysis quantifies themes and language patterns across multiple reports. What are the challenges of analyzing media coverage? Challenges include accounting for media bias and ideological diversity, managing the fast-paced and evolving nature of news cycles, and comparing global versus local coverage to understand different cultural and political contexts.